is that people would start parenting in their native language, like, because it just, naturally you would. But then the problems emerge. So what you could ask about is, what is the kind of typical timeline of how things might progress? And that gives us the opportunity to talk about, how do you know that things are going well?
Okay, what is the typical timeline of how things progress?
Yeah, or like, what would normally happen? I mean, how would you know that it's working in a way?
Okay.
So how do you know it's working is a pretty good question, because then that allows us to kind of talk about, early milestones of speaking. They also kind of apply to anybody. But one of the core things there is that
Crystal Palace, welcome to the Upper Norwood Library Hub Library Live Lunch. This is intended as a way of keeping the community connected, sharing positive and inspirational stories and useful information. So my guest today is Soile Pietikainen, who is a bilingual family specialist. Soile, it's lovely to have you. Thank you for joining us. Tell us, what is a bilingual family specialist and how did you get into that?
Well, that is, in fact, a weird kind of job to have. Usually people confuse me with three kind of professions that are far more known, but I'm none of those. I'm not a speech and language therapist. I'm not a linguist, and I'm not a language teacher. Okay. What I am is I'm a sociologist of family and migration. So I study and work on how do families live together, have good relationships together, communicate well, and be happy.
Okay, and what are the challenges that are facing bilingual families?
When we talk about bilingual families, I mentioned I'm a sociologist of migration and of family. So what is my interest area is when people move to a different country to live, or people are from an immigrant background, and they form new families, what then happens in the functioning of that family? And obviously, the language that we speak is an enormous part. I mean, it's an absolute cornerstone of all of our human relationships and family communication. So the typical kind of family that I would work with is that there's either both parents or one of the parents is what we call a first generation immigrant. So somebody who was born somewhere else and moved to a new country after puberty. Mm-hmm. Like myself, for instance, I grew up in Finland and moved to London like early 90s, then several years in Italy and then back to London. Wow. So I'm a typical case. And in fact, there's a lot of personal story in this, why I came to focus on such a really narrow thing of how do parents communicate with their child in their native language. Mm-hmm. And that is because when I first came to London in the early 90s, one of the first things I realized was that everywhere I saw people in a situation where their parent would be speaking whatever their native language was, and their child would be responding in English. Would not be responding in the parent's language. I was like, how is that possible? How come that's the thing? And then later, in like 97, I was in Turin, Italy, doing a sociology of migration work, research. And I was going into Finnish Italian families there. And I realized, gosh, most of these children don't even understand Finnish, even if their mother has always spoken Finnish to them. And I thought, God, wow, I am going to be in this situation. I mean, how I'm living my life, I'm going to end up marrying a foreigner. This is going to be me. And I thought, this is too important to me. I don't want to be in the situation where I cannot communicate with my own child in my own language. And so I started studying bilingualism, bilingual families, and it became part of my sociology work, even though it is not really a particular area of sociology. Family language is not a particularly popular topic in sociology. So I bridged between several disciplines to be able to do that. And that's become my life's work. I mean, everything else I've tried to do, this topic always keeps coming back to me. Until then, I mean, when I had become a mum and was raising trilingual family in London, then at some point, the crisis hits. And for me, it was when my younger child was 3 years old. It's like 2006. And she was developing really well in our other family language, Italian, but she was speaking less and less Finnish every day. I was looking back to the sort of academic literature on this topic, and I couldn't find anything useful on how to resolve the problem. And so I thought, okay, can I draw something from sociology? And so I started to think about, okay, these are the kind of things we know about how people understand each other in the first place. And there are particular mechanisms of human communication that automatically happen. So I thought, okay, let's try this. And I started using these kind of methods with my daughter. And in 2 weeks' time, she was speaking Finnish. Wow. And in 4 months, her Finnish had passed from the weakest of 3 languages to the strongest of 3 languages.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, exactly. So then I thought, well, you know what? If I can do this, there are lots of families who need the same. I need to understand this better, and I need to make this, you know, not just personal experience, but actually real profession. Yeah. And that's how this became a sort of my mission in life, to help families resolve the problem where children are not responding in the parents' language, and it's starting to cause family tensions and problems.
Fantastic. Before you tell us about how you work with the families, I'm just going to say hello to Tanya, who is watching, who is the reason that I know you at all. And she was on last week talking to us about the edible garden.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've been to her garden. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And also hello to Amandine, who in fact is has a child who is bilingual French and English, and also to Lady Boo, who is watching on Instagram. Hello to anybody else that I can't see the name of at the moment as well. If you have any questions for Soile, please do send them over on the Facebook or YouTube, Instagram feed, and we will try and answer them as we go. So Soile, do tell us about how you actually work with families to help resolve these problems.
Yeah, there are 2 elements to it. One is knowledge, like really drawing from research conceptual knowledge that helps parents understand what this depends on. Because when you're armed with knowledge, then you can interpret your life and feel empowered that you actually know what's happening. And that gives you options and freedom to make choices that are good for you and for your child. So lots of this is knowledge teaching, like my bilingual cake talk and all bilingual cake public events and things are about that, teaching the knowledge.
And this is bilingual cake is your method that you've created.
It's one of the two. Bilingual cake is the education side of things, parent education sessions, and that's the kind of thing I do in community groups. And then the other element is teaching the actual communication methods that turn this thing around. And when I'm doing bilingual family consultancy, one-to-one with families, we go through a process where first we assess the situation, like we start from real data, from how your child and you are actually interacting at the moment. Then I analyze that and I teach the knowledge and the specific concrete skills for the parent to turn that around. That methodology is called bilingual speech activation. We're looking at, depending on how difficult a situation is to start with, we are looking at achieving proper speech activation where the child is happily enjoying to speak the parent's language every day for extended periods of time. It takes about from 3 to 6 months, depending on how difficult the situation was at the beginning. So at the moment, what we're doing right now is that we are working to start a pilot group for a new online course that does the bilingual speech activation as an online course learning mode. So the more people can access it, because obviously there's a limit to how many people I can personally meet. So we are now putting together a group of 10 families to try the course and work through it with me so that I can then create all the written materials and other additional things like exercises based on how the participant families apply to their own family and what questions arise from the 12 recorded lessons that the course consists of. So yeah, so talks of knowledge, then the bilingual family consultancy work where we really seriously go deep into your individual case. And then the new thing, the online course that we're almost ready to launch. And I'm really looking forward to start working quite intensively with about 10 families.
It's exciting to be able to take it to more people.
And to see how people react to things, because we've been working for months and months and months so hard to create something that would be really helpful. But the proof is in the pudding. Once you give it to people and they say, okay, this is what I understand from it, then that, as a teacher, that gives you sort of right, okay, this is how you understood it, and therefore I need to give you this and that for you to get the maximum benefit. So that development process is really great.
Absolutely. And I guess as a teacher you're always learning, right?
Absolutely.
So when you're working with families, how do you know that what you're doing is working? I mean, I guess some of it is obvious, but what are your how do you know that it's working?
When I'm working with families, it's really quite clear, because what we do is we set up very clear criteria. So at the beginning, when we do an assessment, I identify what's going on and things are clearly observable. I give very clear guidelines of what are your exercises to do. So the 20 times 20 seconds method is key to that. One of the things about bilingual parenting is if you go online, you just look for bilingual parenting advice, what you're likely to get are things like, you should always speak your language to your child, you should bombard your child with huge amounts of inputs and exposure and whatnot. But that's actually not what real family life is like. And there are other human relationships in the family. And you do need to use the language that unites the family, which for most people here in the UK would be English. So it's just impossible. You can't do that. So what I tend to do, I take that stress away that you should always be doing something that's actually impossible. Instead, we say 20 times 20 seconds a day, you do this very specific activity that I teach you to do, and you see the results really fast. We're talking about you are seeing the results within days. And the results become really clear because you have a framework in which you work. You see step by step your child extending their language and reducing their reaction time and becoming relaxed and positive about it, spontaneous language use emerging, lots of things. But what is the kind of thing where you know that things are not working is where people come to me usually at different stages of one specific problem. It's like the kind of thing that shows that something's not going right. Is that when you speak your language to your child is not responding in the same language back. This is called bilingual conversation, where one person speaks one language and the other person speaks another language. And often in the parent-child communication, the parent understands English really well. And so when the child responds in English, the parent has no problem in understanding. But what might be the case, the parent thinks that the child understands the parent's language, but they might only understand a fraction of what is being said. And they are using deductive reasoning to make out the rest of the meaning. So when bilingual conversation starts to happen regularly, that's where we have a problem. And then the problem has become much more serious when our child starts to ask, please don't speak your language. This is the situation where a parent really needs to listen to the child, because the child is communicating an emotional impact. This is feeling bad. And the reason for that typically would be that the child does not understand. We can resolve the problem, but it doesn't resolve on its own. So typically when people come to me, they already have quite a serious problem. For example, their child has completely stopped speaking their language, sometimes years earlier, sometimes a couple of months earlier. Or their child is saying, please don't speak that language to me. And quite often I have clients whose child has never begun to speak the language.
Oh, wow.
We have these problems often at age like 18 months. Very typical time for problems to emerge is age 2 and 3. And if families have been doing really well until the age like 4 and children go to, say, reception class, then the beginning of a reception class, or sometimes beginning of a day nursery, can in 2-3 months' time start to erode the language so much that the child is not responding in the parent's language anymore. And all of those problems are resolvable.
This almost have a huge emotional and negative emotional impact on the whole family as well.
It does, yes, it does. In my own research, I mean, most of my clients are children under 5, but my research is on school-age children from 5 to 15. And with those older ones from 5 to 15, you're able to have long conversations about their feelings and experience about it. And what many children have told me is that when adults assume that they know more than they do, understand what they do, it's not a nice experience, because adults might think that they are giving a compliment, oh, she's so good at, but the child knows that they are really struggling. And they are pretending to understand, but they don't actually. And it's humiliating. And can be really embarrassing. And they don't want to disappoint the parent by admitting that they don't understand. So that's the kind of thing that we need to be resolving, because again, we can lift the language with really gentle methods that don't take the whole day, so that things start to feel easy and they start to feel pleasant again.
And what about the emotional impact on the parents?
When I started doing, I did a PhD project 2009 to 2012 in London, the Finnish community in London, about this. When I started working with the community groups where I was doing the research, the first thing was that the first 2 months I was just talking with the parents in the cafe, and there was a tidal wave of pain that the parents were pouring over me. That, you know, they were taking their child to community language class, and they were thinking, well, what's wrong with me that my child doesn't want to speak my language? How have I failed as a parent? There was so much guilt. Mm-hmm. There was so much sorrow, loss, and then also envy and judgment towards others, because then you had this situation where some people seem to be doing really well at it, and they were apparently doing exactly the same thing. So then you had these really negative feelings between, oh, if they just insisted a bit more, it would work. Or why can't I be as successful as they are? There must be something wrong with me. And one of the most important things for me for the whole study was to take that guilt away. To explain that this is actually not a matter of any individual failure. There are much bigger processes at play, and there are tiny little skills that any parent can learn to turn it around.
Okay, so would you like to give us some tips actually for bilingual families?
Well, I'll give you, definitely I'll give you tips. I was thinking it would be better to give tips that everyone could use. Mm-hmm. So these are tips that are really important for bilingual families, but they are also just good parenting. Fantastic. For any child. So I'll give you one big idea, and then I'll give you tips how to achieve it, how to make it happen. And this big idea is about parenting for conversation or for control. There's a sort of basic attitude where parents tend to have. Either we see the child as a conversation partner, or we want to control this child because we are scared of losing our control of the situation. And this has nothing to do with real authority. Generally, people who have very high authority are conversation-oriented people. Control orientation tends to lead to conflict and punishment and negative relationships and power struggles. Yeah. But and all of us do both, but we have a default position. And becoming aware of when we are behaving in a conversation-oriented way and when we make the mistake of any dip into control orientation, which is going to backfire straight away, that really helps. So what do we do to get really great conversations going and an emotional-based situation that has low anxiety, low confrontation, and things just flow pretty easily? And the first tip on that is genuine listening. So this is kind of turning around the classic bilingual parenting advice, always speak your language to your child. Well, okay, for the child to learn to speak, they need to speak. You know, it's not like if I can ride a bike, and if I ride a bike a lot in front of you, you're going to learn to ride it. No, you're going to have to ride it yourself. Exactly the same here. Children, in order to learn to speak any language, they need to be listened to with such patience that they have time to formulate their thoughts and formulate their sentences. And children take much longer than adults to formulate their thinking into sentences. So we need to have the patience to actually listen to our children. So the basic mindset of my job here as a parent is to take my time to listen to my child is a fundamental piece of it. Now, the second one is take turns. This is again different from a sort of idea of bombard the child with your language. Great conversations and great human relationships, and we now know from neurology stuff recently done at the MIT, directly links to children's brain development as well, is that when conversational turn-taking goes back and forth, this is something that conversation sociologists have known for decades and decades, but now there's a neurology to say, yeah, what happens here on human level happens here at the biological level as well. So obviously they have to match because everything we do happens in our brain. So this means that you think of the conversation with your child as almost like there's a ball going back and forth. So you take part in a conversation and then you pass the turn to the child and then you listen attentively and you react acceptingly. Anybody who's into theater knows the improvisation theater principle of always saying yes. So when you're to create a great conversation, you need to accept what the other person says. We adults tend to have this sense of we know better. Mm-hmm. But that stops us from understanding what's the original thinking of the child. Because it's another thing, you know, when we need to have stuff happen. And you know, if we have a great conversational relationship, when we need children to obey, they do. Mm-hmm. If we have a control-oriented relationship where we constantly create trouble, because usually the tantrum is almost always the adult's fault. When you look at it like a sociological observation of what just happened in the previous 5 minutes, it's the adult, not the child, who's causing the tantrum. And it's usually because of the adults either ignoring the child or doing control-oriented interaction. Anyway, so when you are doing this kind of conversation, this is really good for intellectual development.
Interesting.
So you don't want to be changing topics every 3 seconds. Different ages, of course, are able to have different lengths of topics, but you keep on developing the same thought and extending it. That's huge. I mean, you start doing it today, you will see the change in the relationship and the change in the children's thinking and language so quickly. That is very powerful.
It's very good life advice, actually, exactly. For all of us.
Yeah, and what goes with that? These 3 are the sort of the golden trio: the listen, take turns, and read books. Because what we get from reading books is a completely different kind of understanding of language. It's not the same language in the book and in the spoken word. When we are reading books aloud to children and we're interacting around the book, children are learning to decipher meaning from the language itself. See, when we are having normal interaction, the situation gives us much of the meaning non-verbally. In a book, we don't get that situational meaning. We have to understand the meaning from language, and that is abstract. This is why children's books, like picture books, have large images that add meaning and context. And as we go further along in literacy, we get all the way to books that have no images at all. It's a kind of gradual process of reducing the visual aids. But even like tiny children's picture books have richer language than an adult TV program. Reading to children is huge. And then this is the bit of the new research from neurology, is that children with whom an adult is having this turn-taking conversation benefit from listening to books in a completely different way in their brain development. So a child who is read books but is not listened to can't benefit from the book reading in the same way.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's all huge.
It is very huge. Yeah. So these are the 3 big elements for anybody to have a great relationship and support children's linguistic and intellectual development really well. Listen, take turns, and read books. Mm-hmm. Now the other 3 tips I've got is how does this play out in the actual kind of day-to-day parenting that consists of many other things. I mean, these things are a lot to do with when we are having the kind of the high quality moment together. But most of life is like, you know, you've got to get practicalities done. So how do you handle that and keep your conversation-oriented positive parental relationship? Now, one of the core parental experiences for everyone, like I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, is that the kind of experience where we are telling our children to do something and they don't do it. There are 2 things really important to help that thing. Now, often that happens because we have been doing our stuff and we knew already half an hour ago what we needed to happen now. Mm-hmm. But our child doesn't know because they can't read our mind. So let's imagine, like, turn the tables. If we were like at work, for instance, we are concentrating on whatever we're doing, and then somebody comes in and accepts us immediately to do what they are saying. They're interrupting our thinking. They're interrupting what we're doing. We would be annoyed. We would resist it, most certainly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we would be, how arrogant is that? Yet we keep on doing it to our children. There are two little things that we can do to prevent enormous amount of family conflict and trouble and confrontation. And whenever we avoid confrontation, our parental authority rises. And the first one of these two things is connect first. So instead of like calling from the door or from a different room, do this. We go to the child first. We go down to eye level, like, not looking down at the child, but looking on eye level. And we ask, what are you doing? Then we listen. This doesn't take more than a minute or two, but it changes your life. You go to eye level and say, what are you doing? And then you listen, they tell you what they're doing. I say, that's interesting. And then you ask one follow-up question. You ask something that they can tell more about. So you express that you're actually interested in their life and their thinking and their play, whatever they are interested in. And then you say, you know what? I would need you now to come for dinner. Or I would need you now to get prepared to go to the park. Or I would need you now to get ready to brush your teeth for bed. But when that comes, when first you've gone down to eye level, you've asked, what are you doing? You've, in a positive way and with a smile, then you've listened. You've asked them something more about it. That shows that you're actually listening. You being able to ask a meaningful question is where you show that you are actually listening and you're actually interested. And then you say, you know what? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would need you to do this. And then the person says, I can feel I'm being respected and loved and heard. And yeah, I understand that you need me to do that. And then you're prepared to do it.
Again, that's really good advice for general life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great.
Sometimes good with spouses as well.
Yeah.
The other one here is that help children to anticipate events. Mm-hmm. One of the things that is bewildering the children is that they can't control what's happening. Adults are making all the decisions, and that is generally how it should be. Mm-hmm. However, children have anxiety and all sorts of uncertainty from being asked to do things out of the blue. We're coming back to the same. If someone asks us to do something out of the blue, it's not a good experience. Yeah. So very, very practical. This is like you don't even have to make that connection first. This is the kind of very low impact thing on your kind of parent sort of effort levels. Mm-hmm. It's like you say, they're doing something. Say, in 10 minutes, it's going to be dinner. And then you say, in 5 minutes, it's going to be dinner. Mm-hmm. And then 1 minute before they kind of you need them to actually act, you say, okay, now it's time. But it doesn't come out of the blue because you have given a timeline. I still do that with my teenagers. They're 16 and 18. I still kind of give this dinner in 10, dinner in 5, dinner's ready. Uh-huh. And cool. Then you've got everyone where you want, when you want.
Amazing. That's all fantastic tips. Thank you. I'm going to take those on board for my life as well.
Yeah. And then there's the very last one. This is super important for bilingual parenting, but I would say that if our family had younger children now in lockdown, this would be a lifesaver. Take turns to parent. In bilingual parenting, what is really crucial is that the family is not always together. The child needs separate time with each of the parents, 1 to 3 hours separated with each of the parents, because otherwise they don't get long enough time to really interact in the minority language, the foreign parents' language. Because it only takes one English speaker to be present in the room for the learning experience to be completely ruined. You actually have to have the English speakers out. And the minimum 1 hour a day, anything between 1 and 3 hours is kind of ideal. Uh-huh. But imagine this situation now in lockdown. One of the big issues for us adults is not having any private time, and that's stressful. And it makes you kind of really get annoyed and short-tempered. Mm-hmm. And so we can capitalize this, giving the quality time, at least 1 hour quality time with each of the parents separately, and give a breather for the other parent so they don't need to interact with anybody. They can just be with themselves.
That's fantastic. Very, very good advice.
So
We're very nearly out of time, I'm afraid. So in just about 3 sentences, could you tell us about the Bilingual Princess? Because I really want to get a mention of that in here.
Yeah, the Bilingual Princess is to do with the online course that I talked about earlier, with the bilingual fluency. Bilingual Princess is a fairy tale that I wrote to talk about some of the bilingual parenting advice and problems things in a way that is a bit more light-hearted than doing an academic lecture. So Bilingual Princess is a story of the 2 royal monsters getting together and having a baby. And what happens when they've had a baby? They both have begun to speak their own language because they really want to raise the child with connection with both of their families and both of their parents. But what happens is that one day the baby starts to speak, and it only starts to speak in one language. Mm-hmm. And so the royal family tries to resolve this problem and encounters various advisors who advise them some very common bilingual parenting advice. Mm-hmm. And in the story, it goes through what happens if you try to resolve the problem in that way. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And then, of course, what they do encounter at some point is the 20 times 20 second method of how you can actually resolve this problem without it becoming a full-time job for the parents, where you can actually have harmonious bilingual development for children.
Amazing. Yeah. So and this is available on your website, I think.
Well, yeah,
I mean, with other help. Yes.
Yeah. Well, on the website you can find the video. There's a video. It was filmed with Swedish film director Jonas Grimas in my living room, where I tell the story. And then there's a written version with cartoons from cartoon artist Henrik Mäkinen. Brilliant. I absolutely love Henrik's cartoons, because we wanted to create something that we can build on. We can make more new adventures for the Bilingual Princess in the future.
Exciting times.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thanks for having me.
And if anybody watching would like to get in touch with Soile for more information or advice or one-to-one sessions, or to find out about the online course, the Bilingual Princess, anything like that, her details are to the side of the video. So please do get in touch with her for that. Thanks so much for coming to have a chat with us. I'm not going to add anything else except to say that tomorrow on the Library Live Lunch we have Katie Rose, who leads the Welcome Choir in Crystal Palace, among many other things. So please do tune in for that. It's going to be fun, and yes, there will be some singing. So in the meantime, thank you, Soile. It's been lovely to chat to you. Take care, everybody, and we'll hopefully see you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye.